Okay, welcome back to Land Rover Toolbox videos. Front drag link. Down here, it's got a slight bend in it, which means it's been hit at some point. If you can't quite see, then check it out with it laying on the bench. You can see the bend much better. And yes, it's in a very vulnerable position on the vehicle, so we'd expect damage. The best we could possibly do is fit a steering guard to protect that part of the vehicle. Or better still, fit some heavy duty drag link and track rods. We're going to fit both, however in this video we're mainly going to concentrate on fitting the drag link and the track rod. Okay, so checking out the Bearmark performance catalogue first of all, going to steering, and we're looking for steering rod, which is above steering damper. Alright, so click on that and that will take us through to the part on the catalogue which is relevant. Right, so with these catalogues you can drop them into full screen, and I have to allow this on my Mac computer, and then expand it out. So that's the steering box we fitted last week. And this week we're going to be fitting the heavy duty steering rods kit. Kit was also good for the Range Rover Classics Discovery 1 and Discovery 2. There is an extra bracket that's needed to bolt the steering damper to the track rod. Okay, let's get down to basics first of all. With the track rod end, they need to be fixed with something that is either nylock or a castellated nut with a split pin. Okay, nothing else is acceptable. On your bars you'll have a split and you'll have a pinch clamp which clamps the thread of the ball joint into the tube. This is fairly a standard engineering practice for the Land Rover range that we cover. However, we're going to move on a little bit from there, and these ball joints, which have left and right hand threaded nuts, will fit inside the bar like so, and the lock nut is to stop the thread from moving. Okay, so left and right hand threads, they have a pitch either way, and you're lucky because they'll be marked as L for left and R for right hand. Okay, that's how you identify your ball joints. The reason for this is that when you turn the bar to set your tracking, you're either moving both out or both in at the same time. If you don't quite understand this, when we do and set the tracking up, then it will make more sense. Okay, so we'll start from the beginning. What we need is a ball joint splitter, or possibly two hammers. I'm going to use a ball joint splitter because this is a little bit more efficient than just whacking the hell out of the arm to get the taper to split. But basically what you're doing is using a taper splitter, ball joint splitter, to push the ball joint out of the taper, like so. Okay, now we need to do this for all the ball joints that are on the steering first of all. Obviously you've noticed that the locking device has actually been removed, and bang, off it comes. The steering damper needs to be removed off the chassis, and on the chassis end it has a nut and a locking nut over it. Once that's off, you can then undo the castellated nut on the drag link ball joint. You'll also need to remove the steering damper off this bracket. This is fitted onto a taper and you need to be able to remove this part as well. Okay, so we have our rods on the bench, and you can see there we've also got a new steering damper to fit. But the first thing we need to do before we disassemble anything is to make sure that we have the rods the same length. Now, you can either measure them from center to center of the ball joints and write down your measurements. That's on both of these, which will be the track rod and the drag link. Okay, center to center again. What I prefer to do is mark it on a bench like so, and then offer up the new piece when I've put the ball joints on. This is not assured that you're going to get your tracking right when you put this back together, but it's a guide to get somewhere close. Right, you can see there, center of the ball joint cap to center of this bracket taper hole, which is about there. Okay, so I've marked them, I've got them as reference. There's no point in trying to remember numbers. So when you put it back together, your rods will be the same length or very close to. You only need this part here, the rest you can chuck away. So we need to remove the pinch clamp first of all, and then we're going to have to use a little bit of force with a hammer to crack the corrosion around this and lubricate it so we can free it away from the tube. Unfortunately, this is a little bit of a design fault because these threads will be corroded in. So giving it a nice whack all the way around, and you're stretching the metal a little bit so it'll give you leeway so you can then free this off. Now I'm using an adjustable spanner, working it, and if you got to this point and it's moving, you should be okay. There's no point in taking an angle grinder to this because you'll need to get the threads perfect. Okay, this item is a left-handed threaded item, so it'll wind off the opposite way to what you think it would. Okay, so once it's wound off, you'll see how much thread is actually down the tube. This is the part we need. This needs cleaning up before fitting. You can either use a wire brush or a wire wheel. However, once it's clean, inspect the threads to make sure they're not pitted or damaged. If they are, then get a new item. Okay, so this is the bar, and you can see the thread. It'll either be left hand or right hand, either end, and there's no way you'd use a pinch clamp to clamp this together. Just to help you along the way in the future, it's always wise to put something on the threads, i.e. an anti-fretting paste or copper slip. Then you can assemble the track rod ends onto the tubes. You can't get it wrong because the left or right hand thread won't wind on. I also, with these nuts, have just put a little bit of copper slip on to make sure that they are free. Then the next thing to do is to put them to your measurement marks and make sure they're the same length as how they came off. The nuts are still loose, and you can see the marks here. They are as center as they possibly can be. That's one end, and then you have the other end as well. This will not be perfect because setting up the tracking you have to do with the bars on the vehicle. So fitting the drag link, the steering damper, as well as the track rod is not rocket science. The nuts are done up to 14 Newton meters. Don't take my word for it, check out the workshop manual. However, use a torque wrench when you can. In the Bear Mark kit, you'll find that your track rods have got nylocks on them. They're a locking device, and on the drop arm has a traditional castellated nut. MOT tester will always check for any fixings to make sure the split pin's there. Steering damper end had a lock nut. If you remember, if you've been watching us, we had a little bit of an issue with misalignment of steering joints. Right, this one is at an angle to the opposite side, so it doesn't fall right when it goes back straight. We also had excessive play in this drop arm steering ball joint, so this was replaced as well. If you wish to see how this is done, click on the link on the screen right here. The track rod doesn't have a specific length. However, the drag link has a length that has been denoted in the workshop manual. What Land Rover are saying is adjust ball pin centers to a nominal length of 924 millimeters, which then can be adjusted during refit. Basically what you're doing is ball pin centers is center to center, how I showed you earlier. Generally the drag link will be set already when you've taken it off the vehicle, unless it's excessively bent, and then it will be a different length. With our track rod, because it has left and right handed threads, you can turn the bar, and what this will do will either push both the hubs out or pull them both in. Now this is how we set our tracking. What we need to observe also, doing up the lock nuts for the track rod will adjust the ball angle. Okay, so you need to tighten it up and then pull the ball back. What I've used here also is a pair of mole grips. You could also use a set of Stilsons to hold the bar while you do the nut up. There's no torque setting for this. Right, what you'll notice is that the bar has also turned the ball joint to an angle. So once we've nipped this up on one side, we then have to pull the bar back straight. Okay, that's with the wheels that are straight ahead. The track rod end on the other side also needs to be in the straight ahead position. So when you nip it up, make sure that you're not pushing the ball cup over on an angle. So when you've finished, you want to see them both straight, like so. Same applies to the drag link. You want to make sure that once you've tightened up the left hand threaded nut on this side, and yes, do it up tight. You can then pull it back straight, so the ball joint is straight like in this illustration. And looking on the other side, following it down, that wants to be straight as well, therefore no misalignment. Because we've used copper slip, this means that the bar will not seize in straight away and will give us an opportunity to set the tracking again and again. Before we put the wheels back on and actually set the tracking correctly on the front axle, you'll see that our bushes on the suspension are not in the best of health. This will affect the steering and also the tracking of the vehicle. Maybe only slightly, but enough to wear the tyres unevenly, so we need to do the bushes. So this will be the next job before we get around to setting the tracking up correctly. Okay, I've got to show you this steering guard, complete with greasy fingerprints. This is a Wild Bear range from Bearmark. Very good quality, and the metal is a lot thicker than I've seen in some of the steering guards. This is anodized steel. You'll be needing some sort of tools to be able to undo some bolts. Now I'm using guns just for speed, and the snap-on gun will actually pull rusty nuts off. So the bracket actually fits on these two bolts either side on the inside of the chassis. The bolt that I'm cleaning with a wire brush, you possibly might not move the bolt, but the nut will come off, and the nut on here, the nut and the bolt, you can remove and take off the lashing eye. So there'll be plenty of WD-40 needed for this job, because usually it's rusty at this point, and if you don't use something like a snap-on gun, then you're going to have to use a breaker bar. Whereas the other side on here, that's not too much of an effort, and this bolt was still loose on both sides, like so. So we can remove this bracket completely. On the other side it's the same thing, however they supply you a bolt to fit in. These are M10 or 17mm nuts, and basically what I'm doing is putting a little bit of copper slip on and then bolting it into place. Okay, so that's the front brackets. You'll also see a hole which the steering damper goes through. That means you have to undo the steering damper, feed it through the hole and bolt it back up again. The lashing eyes are on the bracket, so you don't need to worry about refitting them, and there's plenty of space to do maintenance work when required. The front plate, you have bolts and you need a 5mm Allen key for the job. So once it's finished, it looks something like this, a very tough piece of equipment. However, the greasy fingerprints are obviously self-supplied.